Warlord's Gold, the fifth instalment in my Civil War chronicles, culminates here at Basing House. Basing was actually made up of two linked houses. The old house replaced the keep of an even older Motte and Bailey castle, so was located within a defensive ring of earthworks and walls, whilst the later new house was located outside the defences. A bridge and gateway linked the two. I'm standing in the ruins of the old house. Together the house had 360 rooms, was 5 stories high, and in its Tudor heyday was considered to be the greatest private house in the country. The Marquess entertained many high-ranking guests, most notably Elizabeth I, who's known to have stayed here twice. But the costs of such royal visits were astronomical, and the Paulet family had soon racked up huge debts. By 1635 the house had been abandoned. John Paulet, the 5th Marquess of Winchester, had moved his household to their hunting lodge at nearby Hackwood. A contemporary writer described Basing by then as forsaken and desolate. But all that was to change. When the English Civil War broke out in 1642, the Marquess, a staunch royalist, had withdrawn back to Basing. It seems initially he'd returned to his old home for safety with no intention of joining the conflict, but his Catholicism had set the Puritan faction against him. And Basing's strategic position on the route from the capital to the western counties made it a prime target for local parliamentarians. Basing House soon became a hub for the royalist cause in the region. Now Stryker, the central character of the Civil War chronicles, has visited Basing before, during the events of the first book, Traitor's Blood. But then the huge estate was still enjoying relative peace. At that time, in late 1642, the Marquess of Winchester was certainly becoming jittery, but the conflict had not yet reached Basing House. Soon after that, more substantial royalist reinforcements were dispatched under the 60-year-old Colonel Marmaduke Rawdon. Rawdon was appointed military governor of Basing House, and under his direction the estate was significantly strengthened. There were already plenty of loopholes cut into the outer walls and various artillery positions in place. But Rawdon oversaw an extensive programme of earthworks that formed a formidable protective ring, which was just as well. For it was in the autumn of that year, 1643, just as those extra defences were reaching completion, that Basing faced its first significant threat. Sir William Waller, one of Parliament's most capable generals during the early part of the war, had lost most of his army at the Battle of Randway Down. It had been a disaster for the rebellion and had left Waller's reputation in tatters. So, when he was placed in command of a new army, the core of which was to be raised from the London militia, or trained bands, Waller saw his chance to make amends. Waller marched into Surrey and then Hampshire, with the purpose of countering the large royalist army moving east through Dorset. Using Farnham Castle as something of a bridgehead, Waller had intended to march directly upon Cavalier-held Winchester. But when his army, more than 6,000 strong, reached Alresford, just a few miles from the city, word reached Waller of a powerful body of royalists, moving down from Oxford. Believing that Hopton's army lay before him and those from Oxford behind, it seemed he feared his new force would be caught in something of a pincer movement. Consequently, he chose to march to Basing House, from where he could easily retreat to Farnham should the rumour prove true. In the end, it was proven false, or at least rather exaggerated. Moreover, it seemed Hopton was actually in no mind to march out from Winchester and engage Waller anyway, so Waller decided to reduce Basing House while he had the opportunity. The capture of a strong enemy fortress would do his reputation no end of good, and he probably saw it as a good chance to blood his newly raised and rather inexperienced army. On the foggy morning of Tuesday the 7th of November 1643, Sir William Waller's army drew up to the northeast on the slopes of Cowdrey's Down. The siege of Basing House had begun. Captain Stryker, meanwhile, is trapped on the inside. What happens next, as seen through Stryker's single grey eye, is revealed in Warlord's Gold, the 5th of the Civil War chronicles.